Welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Tanya Schrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko-Cahill. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Tanya.
Tanya, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Another lovely week on the North Coast.
Classic Humboldt day. Got a little drizzle in the morning, some sunshine in the afternoon.
That's how you can tell I'm in a great mood, because I saw some rain today. Well, let's talk about some important stuff happening in our community. Thad, you're going to fill us in on some things that we all have to think about soon. And I'm not talking about our Halloween costumes yet.
Yeah, this week's cover story, Tanya dives into the glut of local ballot measures on the ballot for November. So folks should have already received their vote by mail ballots in the mail and sample ballots and all that stuff. So if you haven't, check your registration status, get in touch with the elections office, get that sorted out. But yeah, we wanted to kind of look at some of those things that tend to get a little bit less attention on local ballots, which is our local measures. And like I said, we got a bunch of them this year. I actually kind of started out the story, and we have a total of 12 in Humboldt County that have qualified. And kind of started out the story just trying to figure out, like, why so many? I'm sorry, there were 13, and 12 of them are revenue related. And so wanted to kind of first just answer that question, like, why are these all coming all at once? So both did a kind of deep dive looking back at past local elections to see how many measures we had at any given one time, particularly how many revenue generating measures, trying to really kind of see if, like, this is just a case of all local governments kind of feeling the squeeze at the same time, possibly because of inflationary pressures or state budget cuts or other things like that. Turns out I was right that 12 is a lot of revenue measures on the local ballot all at once. We typically, it seems, average about 8 local measures during a presidential election. There's always more in presidential years, more in more in even years generally, and then even more in presidential years. And that's just because there's, that's the largest turnout. And generally speaking, the conventional wisdom is that the lower the turnout in any given election, the more likely the electorate is going to be disproportionately seniors, folks on fixed incomes, and folks who tend to vote more conservative. And so when folks are putting a school bond forward or a sales tax measure forward, they like to get it on those presidential years. But yeah, so found that generally between 7 and 8 local measures in any presidential election year, and generally about 2/3 of those are revenue generating measures. And so this year definitely seemed to be an outlier. So to kind of talk through some of the elements of why that might be, I caught up with Ryan Emenaker, a professor of politics at CR.
And what was the overarching theme of why they thought that we had more this particular election?
Yeah, so Ryan kind of threw out a number of different ideas, and then I tried to run each of them down to see if there was really a through line that connected all these measures. And what I came away with, it just seems like it's a perfect storm this year, that there's no real one reason. That first off, I should say that some of these measures are just kind of a pro forma continuation, so they're an extension of an existing tax. Or in the case of the Arcata Fire District, they're looking to essentially increase their spending cap that they have, which doesn't really affect, the tax rate that folks pay. It just means that Arcata Fire can spend a little bit more of that money. So there's a number of things like that. I think 3 or 4 of those, and then we have some things like, the Ferndale Unified School District has tried to get virtually the same school bond passed for the 2 elections in a row. This will be the 3rd one. And so it's the kind of thing where they're just knocking at the door trying to get voters to approve this thing. So that took up a chunk of the revenue measures we're facing, or we're seeing on the ballot. And then there is, just a kind of, like I said, a perfect storm of others. That it seems like inflationary pressures are definitely impacting some governments. Certainly the Fortuna City Council and Arcata City Council put forward sales tax measures facing budget deficits, and wanting to, I think in both cases, really primarily wanting to just preserve the level of services that they're currently providing, as everything from, fuel and utilities to health insurance for employees and things like that continues to get more expensive, and revenue is kind of stagnated. Then you have, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors, which is putting forward Measure O, which is the 1 cent sales tax that would be in place if approved all throughout Humboldt County. And they're saying that's really earmarked toward, they're going to try to fund road maintenance, try to leverage those funds to get matching grants from the federal and state governments. And they're really wanting to preserve 911 response times and bolster kind of emergency response. Of course, it's a general fund tax, and so their hands aren't tied to just doing those things with revenue. And it really seems like they're bringing this forward is a response to declining state revenue, but also, a response to an existing budget deficit that they have too. In addition to rising expenses that everybody else is facing, they drastically reduced Measure S tax rates. That's the cannabis cultivation tax, which resulted in a pretty decent hit to their budget. So anyway, it just seems like there's a lot of factors playing into this, and that has a lot of local governments with their hands out this November.
Yeah, that makes sense. At first, I kind of would have just thought it was a reflection of the entire area's growth,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also playing catch up, and that
Yeah.
makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it does make it kind of an interesting dynamic on the ballot. As I noted, some voters in multiple cities here are going to face multiple sales tax measures, and so voters in Arcata, Fortuna, and Trinidad are all going to see a city sales tax measure, and then the countywide one that we just talked about on top of it. And so there's some interesting, I guess, at least interesting from the poli-sci geek side of things, of trying to figure out does that make voters more likely, less likely to approve these measures, more likely to approve one and not the other. Certainly there were some members of the Board of Supervisors on the county level who, not so delicately tried to dissuade some local city councils from moving forward with their tax measures, worried that it would, hamper the chances of Measure O passing. So some interesting dynamics on the geeky side of the ballot this go around. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts about this cover story before we kind of switch on over to Jen?
Yeah, I guess all I'd say is I encourage folks to read through it. Really, really strongly encourage folks to register to vote and make sure cast a ballot. And then the Humboldt County Elections Office website has impartial analyses of all of these measures, and so there's a lot of room to get a lot more information for voters who want it.
I really appreciate that, and I second that emotion. Make sure you're registered, make sure you educate yourself, and vote. Vote, vote,
Indeed.
vote. Well, and with that, we're going to pivot over to Jennifer. Jennifer, what is coming to the table this week?
I had such a fun time this week because I got to go up and visit the Rue Gallagher Food Sovereignty Lab at Humboldt State University this week, which I haven't gone to see since it was just torn out with exposed wire and everything, and it is all fancy and new now. So the Food Sovereignty Lab, if you haven't heard of it before, is like basically a teaching kitchen. And there's a beautiful, my God, the stainless steel. There's all this wonderful counter space and stove and, cooking surfaces and things like that with cameras and flat screens, so that all the people watching a demonstration can see all the intricate doings over the pots and pans and whatnot. And you can go there and learn about native foodways. You can go, and it's fantastic. It's a really great addition to the Native American Studies program there. And currently it is Indigenous Peoples Week. Yay. And Cal Poly Humboldt's Indigenous Peoples Week program includes a couple of workshops and a book talk from Chef Calvosa Olson, who is a locally raised person. She is from the Trinity River area. She grew up there. She's Karuk, and she grew up in a couple of places along the river, very, very rural. And she described basically growing up in a yurt with no electricity and no running water, and mostly subsisting on commodities foods, but the bulk of what she ate was food that her parents had either foraged, hunted, gathered, etc. And both her parents were very skilled, and they were able to provide for everyone, and everything from elk to salmon, berries, nuts, lots of acorns, things like that. So she grew up eating a lot of traditional native foods, traditional Karuk foods here on the North Coast. Later, she ended up living in Marin, and she had kids, and wanting to pass on those traditions when you are away from your home is not easy. So what she did was, while she did introduce them to methods of gathering and all that when she could, she also brought indigenous foods, traditional indigenous foods, ingredients into her kitchen when making your regular weeknight dinners and things, and tried to incorporate seasonal cooking and gathered foods into their daily lives. She was saying that she wanted them to, in a world of, Doritos and Dr. Pepper, to
I think she named Takis in there. Yeah.
Yeah, Takis, man. And that she wanted, Takis are always going to be there. They're always going to be around. You can't fight the tide of Takis, but you can learn to appreciate and educate your palate to enjoy and really absorb flavors that come from the indigenous foods on which her ancestors have subsisted for millennia. So things that she was talking about, like bitter flavors, fishy flavors, the kind of light sweetness that you get from berries, those flavors are things that you have to learn to appreciate, or else you're losing part of that too, is in terms of culture, right? So she started bringing in all these foods, like she makes crepes, she makes acorn crepes, she makes coffee, she makes peppernut coffee. She just does a really lovely job really incorporating real seasonal eating. And this is also interesting to me. We always talk about wanting to have seasonal foods, and it's very easy to say, I would like to eat local seasonal produce. But are you willing to do that really? Or are you planning to have a fresh tomato sauce in January? Because really eating seasonally means waiting. So she has this book, which is fantastic and beautiful, that she put together during the pandemic. It was originally going to be basically interviews, her food writing about other people doing the work of food sovereignty, indigenous chefs, things like that. But due to the pandemic, when she couldn't go anywhere, it ended up being a shift to her own cookbook and sharing way more personal stuff than she was planning to. She was like talking to me about it, going, it still feels weird. But the book is called Chiminoam, which I'm probably not saying very well, but Chiminoam translates to the Karuk Let's Eat, and it is Native California foodways for the contemporary kitchen. And she describes it as being a very inconvenient cookbook. Inconvenient because it's not the kind of cookbook where you flip the pages, you look at a picture and go, oh, I want to make that. And then you just write the ingredients down and go out and get them. If you want to, for example, make crepes with huckleberries, or the huckleberry muffins, the recipe of which she shared with us in the paper. You need to ask yourself, where do I get huckleberries? When are they going to be here? Her cookbook is arranged by season, starting with the Karuk New Year in fall. So I got to look at my recipe and say, okay, when am I going to get these ingredients? Where will I source them from? And she also talks in her introduction about wanting people to source things in a really thoughtful way. That means asking yourself, not only, is it legal for me to forage here? Which we should always be asking people, but also, if I'm going to be collecting foods that are the traditional subsistence foods for Native people, do I really just want to go in there and take? Or do I want to maybe think about how I can do it in an educated and thoughtful way? And her book goes into it more, and I'm hoping that she'll talk to us more about it in the future. But, for example, are there some Native elders who could use some of these huckleberries before I get to making my muffins? It's a really different mindset to think about the long-term engagement with these foods and with local cultures. And she really offers a shift in perspective on that. And I really appreciated that. But it's a really great and really beautiful book, which honestly, I would recommend checking it out, if only to have a better understanding of contemporary Native cooking, but also, because this is just her own thing. Like, she's very serious about saying, I am not a chef, I am a home cook. But it really is an insight into, and something that a lot of people I think can relate to, about how do you translate your culture into now, the roots of your culture into contemporary life? How do you negotiate what works for you and your family with your ideals and your ethics? And it's a struggle that we all kind of contend with. And I think this is a really particular take on it and a really particular perspective that is very valuable. And it's also a very beautiful book. So please check it out. She's having events this week, but I'm hoping that we'll hear from her again soon.
Yes, thank you. And I encourage everybody to think about that and maybe pick up a copy. Thank you for that reporting, Jen. We're going to now move back over to Thad. He has a very important news story to share with us. And Thad, would you like to go over what's in the news this week?
Yeah, Tanya, I got to update kind of a continuing story about the presidential vacancy up at Cal Poly Humboldt. As regular listeners, viewers, readers will recall, President Tom Jackson Jr. stepped down this summer after 5 years on the job and announced that he was retreating back to a tenured professor position at the university. The CSU has appointed Michael Spagna as the interim president, so he'll be here for 1 year, but is actually contractually precluded from taking the position on a permanent basis. And so the CSU is in the process of doing this national search for Cal Poly Humboldt's next president. And so as a very kind of first step in that, they have formed a presidential search committee and a presidential search advisory committee. And both of these committees had a joint forum on October 10th at Cal Poly to hear input from the local community about what they want to see and what they don't want to see as well in Cal Poly's next president. So I got to go up there, and it was a very fascinating conversation for a couple hours.
All right, I'll do it. I'll take the job.
I guess we found our president.
No, you don't get off that easy.
Well, what does the community want in our next president at Cal Poly?
So I think the two huge takeaways I would say is they want somebody who is unlike the previous.
Sorry.
It wants somebody who is unlike the previous president. There was there was repeatedly a lot of commentary about, wanting somebody who believed in shared governance, wanting somebody who was present on campus and attended campus events, campus meetings, things like that, and somebody who was a good communicator and a good listener. And of course, these are the three kind of chief criticisms that have been in play regarding Tom Jackson Jr.'s tenure for at least the last couple years. So much so that even, at some point somebody got up, I don't exactly remember his name at the moment, but he is a professor of 27 years there, and got up and said, I've been through a handful of these searches, and it seems like the impulse in these searches is always to find somebody who corrects the wrongs or fulfills the shortcomings of the previous president. But like, as you're hearing today, these themes, like that seems like a pretty low bar, and those things should kind of be a given. So I think that's the first real takeaway from the meeting. And the second is, there's this repeatedly folks brought up the desire to, if not have a local candidate land in that position. A lot of people seem to be clear-eyed in saying that seemed unlikely. At least to have somebody who really does understand the local community. And a lot of folks spoke, I think, very eloquently, actually, about how Cal Poly Humboldt is very unique from the other 22 CSU campuses. It is the most rural. It is the most isolated. On top of that, it's a designated Hispanic serving institution. There's a lot of factors that kind of interplay to it holding both a unique space within the CSU, but also having a very unique and outsized role in the local community. As Cal Poly Humboldt goes, the rest of Humboldt County goes, and there's a lot of interdependencies there for both the community at large and the campus to be successful. And so a lot of folks just really implored the committee to make sure that whoever comes here knows about Humboldt, and really to make sure to listen to that advisory committee. There's a number of references made to a similar advisory committee 5 years ago, making a recommendation of a candidate that then the acting and the acting search committee ignored in putting forward Tom Jackson Jr. for the appointment. So there was just a real hope to get local voices heard in that conversation this time around. And I think that the last thing I would add to that is just that I think it's clear that some folks on campus feel, for lack of a better term, a little bit like the outcast of the CSU system, and they feel like the larger system doesn't really understand the realities that Cal Poly Humboldt is facing, even when it comes to things like travel. One of the speakers said, you guys want these presidents to be really involved in making all these CSU decisions, and that's all good and fine, but you have to realize that taking our president away to go out of those meetings is a disproportionate impact here because of travel time and all those constraints than it would for somebody in LA or Long Beach. So
absolutely. No, I think that's all valid concerns and lots of good takeaways from who we hopefully shape to lead the campus next. Yeah. Thank you for that reporting, Thad. Jen, we just have about a minute, probably. Do you want to give me a quick tease before we call it a show?
I do. I have an important announcement for everyone, and that is, it is Flash Fiction season, baby. So you have until midnight Halloween. That's right, midnight Halloween. Cancel your plans. Stay up till midnight typing. Midnight Halloween to send in your 99-word flash fiction story. 99 words does not include the title, but it's 99 words. Don't send me a 100-word story. My God, count. But I'm very excited about it. We always get a really broad range of work from all over the county and beyond. And I'd love to see everybody who's interested contribute and give it a shot. Nothing is sadder than when somebody sends me an email on November 1st and says, hey, when is Flash Fiction? A little piece of me dies inside. Oh, wait, that's my heart. It's already gone. Send in your flash fiction. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Humboldt County comes up with this year.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you again. That wraps up our show for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick it up, read it cover to cover. We also have a great story about Halloween in there, so definitely things to read, and you can always find it online at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us and staying informed and supportive of our North Coast community.